We want to learn as much as we possibly can about Todd Monken in a hurry, really. Due to my weekend-long travel and turned into a whole second week of travel, I just haven't been able to do as much research as I liked. And when I thought about how to research Todd Monken and what he's going to come to Cleveland bringing and all of a sudden his new assistant coaches that are on that Baltimore staff, I thought a great guest today would be well worth our time. So we're going to do that on Browns Film Breakdown for your weekend edition. It's a great show, great content, great insights. Stick around and you'll be pleased to learn more about Todd Monken. Let's get started with Browns Film Breakdown right now. What's up, everybody? Happy Saturday. Welcome to the show. It's January 31st. Hopefully this podcast finds you and yours well. A reminder to join us at Browns Film Breakdown if you can. And I think, again, elevating your fan experience, podcast, film rooms, all of the above, the daily newsletter, now going to only subscribers. I think, again, the community being formed, all of which I think is fantastic. And we've been rallying around, figuring out who's going to coach this team. And now we're beyond that and into the learning stage of how this all comes together for Todd Monken. We don't really need, if you listen to recent pods, Brad and I dug in on the defense that looms with Jim Schwartz's reaction to this situation. But I want to learn more about the offense because, again, Todd Monken was hired to run an offense that could be more effective than versions we have seen in recent years. And I think he's a bit of an enigma at times to define. And I'm fascinated with what Ken McKusick has to tell us today. FilmStudyRavens does a great job. He's been on this show many times. I don't have to introduce him. Just fantastic coverage of Baltimore. We think about football in a very similar way. And that's why we try to join each other on as many shows as we possibly can. So Ken's going to enlighten us on as much as we possibly could want on Todd Monken and the two assistant hires that have come in now to take over as, run and pass game coordinators. They're just names you're probably not familiar with, but he is, and this is where we learn as much as we can about him. So let's get to our time now with Ken. Ken, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for joining me. I know it's it's always good to talk about these two teams, and we've talked about in our past how interconnected these two franchises are, no matter what, right? Mm-hmm. This happened 25 years ago, more 30 years ago now. But now we have coaches that are drifting from Baltimore to Cleveland, and I think it gets fast. I always love the banter around coaches who leave. Like we're experiencing this with Kevin Stefanski in Atlanta, and he takes Tommy Rees and the whole crew. Very controversial special teams coordinator and Bubba Ventrone now off to the Rams. And the perception of your guys leaving versus the perception of your guys getting somewhere else. The new guys, how does the opposing fan base feel about them? I want to start with the fact that you went through something that you haven't experienced in a while, Ken. You went through a coaching search. I just want to kind of zoom out on that. Did you think it was the right time to move on from Harbaugh? And let's just start with that. I think that's a fair thing to consider. This is a drastic change.
It is a drastic change. I think the reasons given after the fact, I'm okay with. I was pretty much on the fence at the end. I definitely was not in the camp of firing Harbaugh mid-season, late in the season. But then they did kind of choke it up against the Steelers at home, against the Bengals at home, then against the Steelers again on the road in a game where they had a game management decision. Was a major part of losing that football game. And I don't need to go into that, but they had an opportunity to kneel with Zay Flowers that probably would have won them the game, or at least been no worse than a tie and go to overtime. So anyway, I thought from several different perspectives, I think I understand getting rid of Harbaugh, and now we really understand what a lot of the risk was, that you lose every good coach you had, or most of them anyway, when you let your head guy go.
So again, around that decision, around the search, who did you guys feel like were the serious I know Jessie Minter got the job, and there's a lot of crossover because Cleveland was very interested in Minter, who obviously, again, if you've been paying attention, I think folks could see that he really felt inclined to return to Baltimore. He entertained Cleveland, I think, as a part of the whole process and getting experience in the head coaching world and interviews and all of that. But his heart was set for Baltimore. Was that the feeling early in the process that this was going to work in that direction, or were there other serious candidates you thought had a chance at the job?
Yeah, I think there were other serious candidates. And if you wanted to look at the best offensive candidate, best CEO candidate, and best defensive candidates, maybe how I look at it. I had multiple guys in each of these categories, but the best CEO candidate was probably Robert Saleh. I thought he would have been a guy who could have hired a defensive coordinator, not called the defense. He didn't in his last year, I believe, with the Jets, or at least for part of that last year. So I think that could have worked out for a lot of reasons. There are good reasons to have a CEO coach. They build culture, keep their eyes on the field. Culture is critically important. And there are a lot of fans who just make fun of the whole thing, but Harbaugh set culture in some important ways that people won't understand what they've lost until after it's gone. Well, for starters, he had this system of having screens up in the individual position rooms, which had the practice grading directly reflected on that. And so, the the tight ends and the fullbacks are going into one room, and they're looking at their relative blocking grades. And that kind of competition within the team is good. It's not going out to anybody else. It's internal to the organization, but it's still something that I think is a positive thing. Harbaugh himself, kind of a weightlifting freak. He can squat a bunch of weight. I don't know if you've heard this or not, but he was in the 6 o'clock weightlifting group with a bunch of other players, and they really looked up to him in that respect. So he had, there's a tremendous age difference between Harbaugh and most other players. It's 40 years in some cases, and it's not natural for them to connect normally. But in terms of weight training, that's one place where they did. And so there are a bunch of other cultural elements that are going to be lost with Harbaugh that I think are pretty severe losses. And we'll see how much Minter brings his new things that he brings, what value those have, and how much he replaces from Harbaugh. But let me get into the other two. The question you asked me was about, an offensive coach is what most people I think in Baltimore want. There's just much more of an offensive focus. There's a lot of Lamar fans. There's a lot of Ravens fans, and they kind of have distinct goals, I think, in a lot of ways. But in any case, the Lamar fans, for one thing, are screaming at the top of their lungs for the last several years that Lamar's career is being wasted by John Harbaugh. I think it's very unfair, but it is what it is. So anyway, the offensive coordinator I wanted was Kubiak, and obviously part of the problem was that he wasn't going to become available until later on in this process. In fact, I think it's just this last week he could have been interviewed, right, on the
almost winning is a curse for those guys trying to get a job. It's strange like that, but you're right.
The defensive coordinator that I liked was Minter, and so they got him. And you have a head coach now who's doing one side of the ball. A lot of people like that because you keep that coach. If he's as good as people seem to think he is, then it'll be great. And if he isn't, then they'll have to get rid of their head coach and their defensive coordinator at the same time, which is one of the reasons I prefer a CEO head coach.
Right, totally get it. I'm interested. Did you, from the decision to keep or to hire Minter? I know those two didn't. I don't think. Maybe they did. You can enlighten me on this. Did they cross paths on the Baltimore staff, or Minter got out of there before?
Minter was only here 17 to 20, and then he went off to Michigan and whatnot, and then the Chargers. So no, he wasn't with Monken at any time.
I can't remember if the Michigan Georgia teams crossed paths in that era. Actually, I don't know if they did or not. I think the TCU upset kept Michigan out of that game that probably should have been Michigan Georgia. So I don't think they crossed paths. Okay, so was there a hope with Minter's hire that Todd would stay? That's a big question, because he was obviously already connected to Jim, and maybe the presumption was Jim's in New York. He's probably going there. Was that the early impression?
Yes. I think the impression was, in fact, that Harbaugh may have lost his job in part because of loyalty to Monken, that he wanted to keep Monken, run back with the same coaching staff, including Orr and Monken, and not make any changes. And that might have been the straw that broke the camel's back with Bisciotti. Now, Bisciotti tells the story differently. At his press conference, he says that, no, he'd really pretty much already decided. He had the conversations a month ago with DaCosta on how they would initiate a search and what it would look like. But in any case, I think him saying, no, I want to come back with Monken, there apparently were still people in the building trying to convince him to keep Harbaugh.
Okay, got it. So let me just kind of keep pivoting, because this is obviously focusing on the Browns, so people are really interested in the Todd Monken element, as you would obviously expect. Mm-hmm. So was there a belief, like, I guess what I'm getting at, is there not dread, but is there like a concern? Let me ask you this. How did you think he did in his tenure in Baltimore? And we'll start there, because that's where you kind of drive the conversation around trying to fit, because this is not, I think, a thing that's healthy for many organizations, right? The Browns are trying to deal with a lot of like keeping Jim Schwartz because he did a nice job for them. But I think they got in the way of a lot of their conversations and negotiations and interviews. Whereas obviously that's not the case with Todd in Baltimore, but I am curious what the general fan opinion of him was.
I think it was quite positive, honestly. I think there were fans who wanted to keep Monken and let Harbaugh go. They blame Harbaugh for every offensive play call, every defensive play call, even though he doesn't make either.
Yeah.
But he needed to interject himself more and this and that. Monken did a lot of really positive things for the offense. The tight end usage with the Ravens was tremendously powerful. 143.5 passer rating throwing to the tight ends in Lamar's consecutive MVP seasons. Most of what happened to the 2025 Ravens, the reason they're 8-9 is because Lamar was hurt. And even though he was playing at less than 100%. And everything about him statistically was off during that period. And things were off about the running backs too, because a lot of the misdirection, which is really the fuel of the Ravens offense, was gone without Lamar.
Yeah. Yeah. So he comes into the situation, he gets hired in 2023, takes over for Greg Roman, right about that?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Okay. We all know what Greg Roman likes to do, what he's excelled at, and where he's limited. Was there a feeling that he was able to capitalize on the old successful run operation while building more success downfield? What was the I guess what I'm getting at is was he able to adapt to keeping some of the things that Greg Roman did well while obviously developing a more cohesive, successful, threatening downfield pass game?
Yes, that's probably the biggest positive of Monken in his time with the Ravens was that he was able to layer on additional concepts to already a very powerful run game. He used Ricard less than they had in the years before, but I think it came to greater total offensive impact. Lamar won consecutive MVP awards in 20. Well, no, sorry, he didn't win. He had consecutive MVP level seasons. Sometimes
Yes.
I get into this discussion with people,
Yeah.
but he was outstanding from that perspective. The Ravens got lighter, which means they're still the heaviest team in the NFL, but they're playing at 1.85 tight ends plus fullbacks plus OL6 per play, which means you only have an average of 2.15 spots because you need one running back every play. 2.15 spots for wide receivers, and that's in 11 personnel league. That's very unusual. And there's been, if anything, there's been a resurgence of more 12 and 13, including the Browns, by the way, across the rest of the league. I think in large part driven by the Ravens' success with the tight ends.
Let me ask you this. Do you think he, and this might be something you don't know, which is fair to say, but do you think he came in and adapted to the personnel in place, the Ricard? I mean, you talk about a reduction of Ricard's role, but still, you come in, you know what you have, a tight end heavy group that's very talented. I think at the time he came in, and again, I don't want to speak out of turn here about knowing exactly where the Ravens roster was at the moment he arrived, but I think they've done a better job adding more weapons in the wide receiver room. So did you get the impression that he preferred to live in this? You talked about 1.85 extra big bodies, you know what I'm saying? Tight ends, fullbacks, 6 offensive linemen, or was this something that felt unnatural? I guess it's a hard thing to answer from the outside looking in, but I just guess I'm like, were you watching them and do you feel like he was effectively creative in the big personnel versus maybe some guys are more comfortable being creative in the lighter personnel groupings, et cetera? You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, I think a little of both. I mean, the Ravens have never been super creative with light personnel, and I look at teams like the Chiefs and maybe the Steelers to a lesser degree, the Roethlisberger era, as being guys who had all these bunch and pick formations, and they were trying to
Right.
get people open off that and have a high timing game. The Ravens' passing game has never been a really high timing game. It hasn't been a precision Drew Brees type of offense because Lamar Jackson, that's just not his bent. He extends plays and punishes teams for not being able to continue with coverage. And that's his specialty. He's not a guy who hits somebody on a 15-yard back shoulder out. I mean, it's not what he does. That was Joe Flacco's game. It's not. It's really not his throw, and that worries me a little bit. By the way, about the Ravens' new offensive coordinator is he's a Peyton guy, and he's coming in with that kind of a bent, quick timing offense. Maybe he'll help Lamar get a little bit better in that area, but if he really tries to change Lamar, I think not only will there be friction, but there'll probably be failure.
Who did they hire? I might have missed that, Ken.
Yeah, they hired just today Declan Doyle.
Oh, Declan Doyle. You're right. Yeah, the Bears. Yeah.
From the Bears.
He's a young guy, right? Very young guy.
30 years old. So he's the offensive coordinator last year, but the non-play caller under Ben Johnson supposedly had a very broad impact on the game game planning, but did not call plays.
Got it. Interesting pairing. I mean, think obviously anybody who's getting that influence from Ben is doing the kind of stuff you want to see if you can recreate, right? Browns are trying to do a little bit of that with Shieldhouse and even chasing the younger 30-year-old, just like Declan there, the Grant Udinsky down in Jacksonville. So back to Todd, obviously. So I kind of need to say to myself as I'm trying to remember all this in real time, it's not like he wasn't in that multiple tight end world. He was living in the Darnell Washington, Brock Bowers world at Georgia. So that all cross-pollinates and makes sense. I'm sure that's part of the interview process, why he was hired and all of that stuff. So that's good. That's fun. I think the question then I would have is these two assistants he's bringing with him, Travis Switzer, and the other one's name
Warhop,
is
the offensive line coach.
So I want to ask you about all three of them because I forgot about George Warhop he's bringing with him, and then Danny Breyer, who's bringing as a pass game coordinator. Sometimes knowing what these guys do is a complete and utter mystery, and that might be the answer, Ken. Like Jake, I don't know what they're doing all the time, but I was curious if those guys have gotten any buzz internally for being whatever, like sometimes I know it's the Browns were here for so long with Stefanski. I knew kind of which coaches were doing like red zone scripts and things like that. So I didn't know if you had any insight. Obviously, you'll have more on Warhop. Maybe the other two are a bit of a mystery.
Well, Switzer he's been with Ravens for several years now. I think maybe 5 or 6 years now. But he was run game coordinator the last two, and maybe even three. But he's out as soon as they brought in Ledford, because Ledford is the offensive line coach and run game coordinator.
Yeah,
and he's got a very extensive resume. I'm very excited about that because he's been a guy who's helped running backs get better success rates, and that's what Lamar is good at too. So I think that'll work out.
Love that hire. I was a guy I was obviously interested in as Kevin went back to Bill Callahan down in Atlanta. Yeah, good hire, good stuff.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I think Switzer will be fine. I think he'll be a guy who, clearly has worked with Monken before. The Ravens still have had, very near the top, if not at the top, rushing attack the last couple of years. And, he's been in charge of the game here. He's done it without a great offensive line. I will say this, the Ravens offensive line the last 2 years with Monken has not been a super big pulling offensive line. They were under Roman. They had some remarkable individual game pulling numbers. Like Bradley Bozeman once pulled 25 or 26 times in a single game. And we're talking about, not only we're talking about a large number of pulls for a left guard, but also a guy who's not very athletic doing it. And the Ravens were able to with good footwork to get that done. The last couple of years, footwork has not been that good. And that's unfortunately Warhop's tenure here. They've had more trouble with guys getting pushed back. Some of it's the puller, Daniel Faulele, not a particularly good puller. Some of it's on the guys not really understanding where their first step needs to go at center and right guard typically, to not block the left guard from pulling or vice versa.
So did you get the impression that Warhop was in charge of, and I asked this question because I just don't know with some of them, like the Browns have had some younger offensive line guys who were just clearly technicians and teaching their guys, but maybe weren't so deep in the weeds on protections and run game movement. Like, was Warhop kind of leading any of that? Did you get the vibe he was doing some of that stuff, or are you curious on that, if you had any insight?
Well, certainly watch at camp every day, and Warhop is definitely a technique teacher. And that's what I think he brought to it more than anything else. And the previous guy, the one that he replaced, was Joe D'Alessandris, who was very much that same thing. I couldn't tell you how much input either of them had into the game plan. The fact that they've got somebody else whose job it is to do that, and Travell Wharton and Warhop, are not obviously involved in that. I couldn't tell you specifically how much Warhop's opinion on game planning really meant. He teaches hand placement. He teaches some good things about footwork. That was the same thing with D'Alessandris. He also had one guy that he really banged the table for in the draft. The Ravens ended up drafting. It's Carson Vinson, who looks like he'll be a left tackle of the future now. But he was very excited about him. He spent most of the summer, and particularly during the OTAs, over coaching that kid so much. I mean, he literally got coaching every single rep. Very weak technique player, it's true, but he really spent a lot of time over coaching this guy. He's clearly got a significant investment in it. You may see that relationship develop with one or two linemen in Cleveland.
Got it. Great. So you listen to obviously most of these press conferences the way we do. And it's okay to be callous and say answer. Did you envision Todd Monken as a head coach in the NFL? Did you think that would happen for him?
No, I didn't. And I thought if it was going to happen, it probably would have happened after 23 or after 24, and he did have interviews and just nothing
Mhm.
developed. But first of all, he's not your typical hot coaching hire just because of his age. The same thing goes for Schwartz too, by the way. I mean,
Mhm.
he's the
Mhm.
wrong age to build a legacy coaching dynastic tree, whatever you want to call it. So if you want to create your own area, I mean, you got to hire a 42 or 44-year-old guy. You don't want to, or a 37-year-old guy maybe, but you don't hire a 58-year-old guy. And I think Monken might be 59 now. I'm not
Yeah.
100% sure of his age. But
Yeah. Interesting. It does, and it kind of does seem like kind of in the mold of like he just is I don't even know, like an every guy. I don't know how to phrase that. You've heard him talk. He isn't a cookie cutter. Is that the way to say it? Like
yeah,
he
all right.
definitely let it fly. I mean, we just spent 6 years with Kevin Stefanski who wouldn't let. I mean, just and I don't mean this as a knock on Kevin. I think he does a lot of compartmentalization and like keeping things in, taking, but just a very flatline, dry personality.
Mhm.
Whereas it feels like Todd, and we'll see if that changes when you're in charge of everybody. But it feels like he will be kind of brutally honest at times. Did he do that for you as a coordinator doing his interviews through the weeks?
Yeah, absolutely. And just the entire demeanor. I'm very skeptical is not the right word. What I don't really believe I'm ever going to get very much but coach speak from most interviews. But
Right.
when Todd Monken got up to the podium, he might say anything at all. The first thing you notice is just demeanor is strange. Is he'll have his play card that he's taken from practice, and he'll stick it in the front of his pants. It's like sticking out of his pants, and you're like, this is
Yeah.
just weird. This guy doesn't give a crap, and it really shows in some of the things they talked about. The Ravens very internally facing organization. They don't let
Yeah.
anything out. And
Right.
Monken and Harbaugh had almost like a public spat during the season. And yet, Harbaugh and Monken are completely loyal to each other. He
Right.
was going to go to New York if he hadn't gotten the Cleveland job. And Harbaugh really wanted to keep him in Baltimore had he been able to keep the job. And he obviously took him to New York with him as the first choice, and wished him the best, I'm sure, in terms of getting the other job. But
Mhm.
the other thing is he says things that are really going to reassure you about what his offensive philosophy is that are different from Greg Roman. So Greg Roman, basically really liked point of attack football. Even if
Yeah.
you got 8 in the box, he could run against it, yada yada. But with Monken, he said, well, a balanced offense is one where you're forcing the opposing forcing the opposing defense to defend every blade of grass. So we want them make them all 5 of our skill position players, our eligible receivers, need to be threats to them.
Mhm. Yeah. I think the thing I found fascinating kind of rewatching, I've just started to really kind of pay close attention. I obviously watched 2 times closely as these 2 teams met, but it morphed into some under center, some wides and getting Derek comfortable. Would you say the phrase for him, players over plays, is a fair statement?
I think so, because I think he really changed a lot from being a guy who was much more comfortable in 11, by the way, for a lot of his
Yeah.
career before Georgia, then went to
Yeah.
12 at Georgia with a great, and the NFL is getting back around to 12 as we've kind of discussed, but very comfortable working with the multiple tight ends and deriving value from the fact that when you have 12 or 13 on the field, the other opposing offensive coordinator defensive coordinator rather, doesn't know how to line up against you exactly. They don't know exactly what
Yeah.
package to put in to start with. Are they going to be heavy? Are they going to run something with flex tight ends that looks more like having 3 or even 4 wide receivers? What are they doing? Uh,
It's fascinating. I wanna ask, this has been great, Ken, because this obviously just some cursory information I think is really good for our people to understand, Todd, before we really try to do some film on our own side is what's your this is a transition time. Obviously, the entire division, it's stunning that I think one would be the worst head coach kept his job, but,
mhm.
uh, it does feel like, and I say this because I have a lot of experience, Browns fans have a lot of experience in this, where you change a lot of your philosophical angles of the game. You change coaches. You maybe even this. I know the Ravens didn't change front office, but this happens, and you kind of see the bath water can rinse out some talent. Do you think some names that are going to be upcoming free agents because of the change? like, obviously, I think Declan Doyle is going to come from Ben Johnson's world of like, we love tight ends. We want to get those guys on the field. So I think a lot of Browns fans are trying to connect, like, would the Browns go after Patrick Ricard? Is Charlie Kohler going to be available? Like, have you guys thought of that? Has that been a thing that like you started to weigh, like, which one of these guys you think they prioritize? Because I do think that I would imagine Monken's going to have some interest in a bigger body. Maybe his Kohler doesn't get re-signed or something. But and I'm not really talking about anything on the defense side here, more so just like which of these like structural foundational pieces, because Isaiah's been there for a while, Kohler's been there for a while, so on and so forth. Then I mean, we know Tyler Linderbaum's situation, which you can enlighten us on a little bit as free agency starts to get a little closer. But I do think there will be the folks who follow the Browns will be like, okay, well, would Todd be interested in bringing some of those guys over? You know what I mean?
I mean, I think any of those guys are potentially very valuable. All three of them, Kohler, Likely, and Linderbaum, are guys that are the top now of the Ravens need list. Draymond Jones might be in that group as well.
Yeah.
Linderbaum is the fascinating one, because I think that in order to make him a worthwhile signing at the kind of money he's going to command, I think you have to get Lamar Jackson signed first. Not because they can't make the money work out, because they can. They can sign him either way and make the money work out. But I want to be sure Lamar's going to be here for 6 more years before I commit to Tyler for 4. And Tyler's going to be an overpay. Whatever they pay him, you're going to be overpaying for his value, maybe 17, 18, 19 million dollars per year.
Mm-hmm.
And if they do that, they're getting a middle of road pass blocker. I want the Ravens to make an offer to him that lets him set a very high floor for himself, maybe 16 million a year, 15 million a year, lets him start the bidding basically with all the other teams. I think there'll be multiple bidders, and I think they'll outbid the Ravens. And there's no incentive right now for Linderbaum to sign before free agency begins. Not one iota of incentive, because he's got no more risk on the table before that. So, he'll be out there, and somebody will win the Linderbaum sweepstakes, and they're going to realize, hey, this is a guy who's just a very average pass blocker. PFF's aggregate score really overdoes what Tyler Linderbaum is. So
it's kind of what I've seen too. I think his name gets put in some of the Creed Humphreys and some of those guys who are really good, and it's not. This is typical free agency. Everybody you're kind of getting to this sweet spot of guys. Usually it's not interior offensive line, but this is the guys get overpaid. It's what you do to get somebody out of an organization. I do think you're right. I am fascinated to see if that happens. And the reason I ask is it does feel like so many free agents leave an organization. They go to somebody else in the division. I don't know if it's like the frequency, so you're a little more comfortable or something like that. I'm sure you noticed it too over the years, but is your impression they're going to go heavy after keeping guys? I know they just extended Mark, and I know that's not a very long contract, but what's your impression on those guys? And do you think they keep Patrick around?
I kind of do think they'll keep Ricard around, and the Ravens have a slight advantage in signing him. So anybody else is going to have to basically pay him about $3 million a year to just be the same. He has a good endorsement in Baltimore from Pizza Bowlies. He has the veteran service benefit contract, so he can be paid about $1.5 million extra without accounting against the cap. So there's that advantage in staying with Baltimore. If he didn't get it, the Ravens do have other guys they could give it to, but Ricard would probably be a good choice if they want to use him. But I don't think we have any idea right now, given the new offensive staff that is just assembling as we speak with Ledford and Doyle, whether or not they really want to have a fullback anymore in this offense. So we'll see.
Yeah, interesting. And then you think they pay Isaiah? Well, I know it was a weird year for him with injuries that cost him. But you could see down the stretch, especially that catch he made against. But he's a special player. And I kind of talked to Browns fans about how I think Harold Fannin is a very similar player. A little more. I think Harold Fannon's a little more after catch explosive, where I think Isaiah is a better go up and get it, track the football player. But it's fascinating because you start to pay multiple tight ends, and that's the same with Charlie. It's like, how much are you investing in that position? So what's your feel on that one?
I don't see a world in which they keep Isaiah Likely, and it bothers me no end. I mean, before the season, I was basically of the camp that, look, they can't let all these tight end contracts expire at the same time, and all 4 of them are done at the same time. Now, Mark Andrews did happen to already be re-signed December or so. He had a terrible year. I mean, 6.0 yards per target. That's just not acceptable. He's older. There's real questions about whether or not that was a smart move at all. Isaiah would have been the player to keep. They offered him $14 million a year in camp, reportedly. Deal didn't get done because he got injured shortly thereafter. He looked great in camp, by the way. And Kolar is another guy that, there's a right player, right price for him, for the Ravens, but they very much live by that mantra, and they won't overpay generally.
I'm with it. This is going to be fascinating, man, because it's just so rare, as you know very well, that not only does Baltimore change coaches, but Pittsburgh changes coach. It's going to feel like a really weird, almost upside down division to an extent without the two pillars of coaching. And even Kevin had been there 6 years. It's not nothing, especially for the Browns. It will feel very weird to see how this all looks, how it all feels. And if the division trend lines stay the same as they have been now for 2 decades in this century. So it's going to be interesting. And I look forward, Ken, to yucking it up with you about it, man. We at this point, if they keep hiring guys from Baltimore or keep signing guys, we're gonna have to talk again. And it just feels like the Browns are pushing that direction at this point, man.
Well, don't be a stranger. I love having these conversations. And if there's a player coach going the other way, I'll be calling on you too.
We will we'll be there to serve, man. We can make this it feels like almost a normal off season. At this point, we'll have to cross over again. So, Ken, tell everybody where they can follow you again on Twitter if they want to have some insight on the other side, especially since you've obviously seen many of these names and they're paying close attention to free agency and whatnot.
So I'm at FilmStudyRavens on Twitter, and probably the best place to see my content is on my website, FilmStudyBaltimore.com. In particular, if the Browns win the Tyler Linderbaum sweepstakes, go through that. I'll have, all of the downgrades you've had for the whole season are visible out there in terms of an offensive line article, and you can kind of follow along with your own tape review if you want to.
Ken does a great job. Some of the best O-line grading you'll find in review. So well worth your time if you want to understand what has happened. Again, with Monken's time, if you can go back and check his archives and look at specific games and breakdowns and all of that. So I encourage you to do that. Ken, we appreciate you again, man.
All right, take it easy, Jake.
Guys, that's it for today's show. Thanks to Ken for stopping by, giving us really good Todd Monken insights. I couldn't be happier with what we got there as far as just like a good, again, intro to some of those names that you're going to have to start getting familiar with. Intro, obviously, to what Todd did in Baltimore. And we'll have to see. The thing to track will be if he continues the trend lines of what he was doing, given that personnel in Baltimore is definitely going to be very different than the personnel he's dealing with in Cleveland. So we'll all be quite fascinated by that. If you're on the YouTube side, make sure to smash subscribe and like to help us, find more Browns fans. And then, as I say, on the audio side, if you could give us that 5 stars and a written review, we greatly appreciate it. And above all else, come to brownsfilmbreakdown.com or tell somebody you know about it. It's a fantastic growing Browns community that I think you will really enjoy being around. Okay. Thanks for stopping by today. We'll see maybe some content coming on Sunday. We'll keep you in the loop on that one if there's anything newsworthy that breaks. But otherwise, keep your eyes out. Join the website. You'll get all the content delivered to your email. It'll be worth your time. So thanks again for being here, guys. Have a great weekend and go Browns.